Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. Thank you for being a part of our study tonight. We are studying Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 28, which is the book, the entire chapter 6. We've been studying Daniel, and we've seen some amazing things happen in the land of Babylon. This is while the children of Israel were captive in Babylon. If you will remember, in chapter 1, we looked at the personal history of Daniel at age 12 as he was carried to Babylon. By age 15, he's serving in the court of Nebuchadnezzar as an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar and a leader in the country. Part 2, we picked up in chapter 2, and that covers chapter 2 through 7, which is what we've been working on right now, the prophetic plan for the Gentiles. And this was actually written in Chaldean. If you will remember, Daniel was bilingual. He spoke the Chaldean language as well as Hebrew. So chapters 2 through 7 is written in Chaldean, as this was an admonition to the Gentile nations that God was on the throne and God was to be served. No matter what their feelings about God were, God was to be served and feared. And so all of this is written in the Chaldean language. In chapter 2, we studied about Nebuchadnezzar's statue dream, where he dreamed of a statue with a golden head and silver arms, bronze, and iron, representing the nations that would arise after Babylon. The head of gold, which was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, one of the greatest kingdoms that ever ruled the earth. Following him was the Medes and the Persians, which is what we're going to be talking a good bit about tonight. And then the bronze, which was Alexander the Great, as the Greeks took over. The Romans followed them. The legs of iron divided into the eastern and western empires of the Roman Empire. And then the feet of clay and iron mixed, which was struck by a stone symbolizing the kingdom of God, would replace all the kingdoms of the earth after a period of time. And then chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar built a statue and commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego bow to this statue. They refused, were thrown into the fiery furnace. We know what happened. God joined them and they were let free. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a dream of a tree that reached into the heavens. That was an image of him, and that tree was cut down. For a period of time, he would be insane and would not be able to rule the kingdom, but then the kingdom would be restored to him in the end. And then chapter 5, we have a contrast where his son or grandson, Belshazzar, saw the handwriting on the wall as he had desecrated God's items from the temple, drunk wine out of them, and had a party. This displeased God. Both chapters 4 and chapters 5 shows that God is sovereign over the greatest kings of the world. That God's power still can humble these individuals. Daniel said Belshazzar would die. He died that very night. And the kingdom was taken over by the Medes and the Persians. And so chapter 6 is where we pick up today, after the Medes and the Persians have taken over. Part 3 will be chapters 8 through 12. This is written in Hebrew and will be a prophetic plan for Israel, and we'll get to that. Now, I've been doing some research on the Medes and the Persian kings. There's not just a really good list of these kings, because different archaeologists and historians see differently what they see in the record. And so as far as just putting up a list of the Medo-Persian kings, I've really been unable to do that. So we're going to skip the details of those kings. We're going to start with Darius in our lesson today and move to Cyrus. Cyrus is considered to be Cyrus the Great. And then this Darius, nobody can really identify exactly which king Daniel was talking to. This Darius may have been a vassal king set up by the Persian Empire, and he was a Mede, so we believe he was of Median descent, but he served in Babylon after the fall of Belshazzar. And Daniel served in that court, so was elevated under this guy. So at any rate, the Median Empire covered a large area, and I've thrown that picture up. It was north of the Fertile Crescent, which is where most of our Bible story takes place. And this Median Empire stretched all the way into what would be Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. It was a large territory that stretched all the way over almost to India, if you want to get out your map and look at some of that territory. So this Median Empire was very large, and then it was merged into the Persian Empire, and so it's almost considered the Medo-Persian Empire. And I think there was the kings married, like the king of the Medes married the daughter of the Persians, and the king of the Persians married the daughter of the Medes, and so there was a mixing of these two empires at this particular point in time. And so Daniel is serving in the city of Babylon during this Medo-Persian invasion and takeover of Babylon. So I just want you to kind of see that, understand that the area that we're talking about, Babylon was more in Iraq, and then Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of India, Turkey, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Syria. All of these places kind of fell under this Medo-Persian Empire. So that's where we are. That's what's going on when we take up Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to, now if you remember in the lesson chapter 5, the last verse, last few verses, Darius takes over, and Darius is 62 years old at this particular point in time. So Belshazzar is removed as king of Babylon, and Darius takes his place. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, and that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. So Darius comes in, and he has taken over the Babylonian capital. He's taken over the city and the territory of Babylon. And so coming in as a new king, he immediately establishes local people to be in charge, so that they know the people that need to be talked to. If certain things need to be done, they know who to get. So it's a smart move by this King Darius as he comes in. He sets up 120 princes. These princes are going to be over the provinces of Babylon. It would be kind of like a situation where you have a president and governors. There's a governor of each state, and they report to the president. That's not exactly the way our government is set up. We have a democracy. A democracy is very different from a totalitarian kingdom, even though there are people that will tell you that our current president is totalitarian. I totally disagree with them. We're still a democracy. States still have rights and make decisions, and this president respects the rights of those governors. So here we see Darius sets up governors or princes over each territory, and then he sets up 3 presidents, the way they refer to it in this passage. And these presidents would be the 3 individuals that report to the president. So I envision governors, cabinet, and president. So the governors are going to report to the cabinet. The cabinet reports to the president. So here in this we have the princes who report to the presidents, who then report to the king. Now that Darius has set up this hierarchy, Daniel is in the mix. And I think it's interesting that Daniel was recognized within the kingdom as an important person and was immediately recommended to Darius, and Darius immediately places him as one of these three presidents. Now, it says that Daniel was first. So out of the three, Daniel was the most favored and was the most respected. Verse 3 then says, Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So Daniel here presents himself very well to Darius. Darius is a new king. And I want to go back here and point out that Daniel is a prisoner, an exile, if you will, in the land of Babylon. And as a foreigner and as a person in exile, yet he is able to take on leadership roles in the place where God has placed him. And I think that's the lesson for us in a lot of Daniel, is that Daniel did great things in a foreign land for a foreign government, and behaved himself in such a way that he was elevated to positions of authority, able to make decisions over the affairs of the kingdom, and able to influence others. I think that's a lesson for us. No matter where I find myself, I should be able to do my job, do what's expected of me, serve God, and be an inspiration to the people that I am around. So a lot of times we feel like we're displaced and we can't do what we need to do. But I'm telling you, we can do what we need to do no matter where we are. Just look at Daniel. Daniel did. And he did it as a young man. He was 12 when he was taken prisoner to Babylon. 15, he's serving in the court. And by now, he's getting on up in age. And he's still serving in the court of these foreign kings, doing the things that he needs to do to show that God is on the throne and that God is the authority. We need more people like that today. And then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. I want you to look at that. The presidents and the princes were jealous of Daniel. You know, I think a lot of times we're jealous of individuals that come to the United States from other countries when they're successful and able to do things. We tend to look down our noses at foreigners. But God never has. God uses everybody to the best of their ability. And here Daniel was a victim of racism, if you will. But it was racism from folks out of jealousy. They were jealous of his position. They were jealous of his relationship with Darius. And when they began to look at his service to Darius, they could find no fault in him. He wasn't lazy. He did what he was told. He wasn't conspiring against the king. Even though this was a different king, and even though he was in exile, they could find no occasion or fault against Daniel. He did his job to the best of his ability. He served the king and did what was right. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So they couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel. Verse 5, Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So now all of a sudden they can't find anything wrong with his duties, his service to the king, his execution of his duties. He does everything he's supposed to do. He's without fault. He's on time, punctual, does what he's supposed to do. They examined his record with a magnifying glass and could find no fault in him. So then they said, okay, how can we drive a wedge between Daniel and the king using Daniel's God and Daniel's service to his God? So then they began to look for a wedge, a way to get between Daniel and Darius, using God as the wedge. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. And I want you to notice this. This is going to come back later. This salutation, O King, live forever. King, we love you. King, we respect you. King, we're going to do what you tell us to do. King, we're loyal to you. And all the time they're deceiving Darius. All the time they're plotting against Daniel and trying to drive a wedge between Darius and Daniel. Folks, there are a lot of people out there that would drive a wedge between us and other people for their own purposes, for their own gain. You and I cannot allow these wedges to come between us and other people. We need to see everything as a wedge, as an opportunity that Satan is using to destroy, and we need to move beyond that, and we need to move forward to do the things that God would have us to do. In verse 7, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors, the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute. So they basically said, these princes and these presidents, that they've consulted everybody in the realm. This is a unanimous decision, yet the most favored president, Daniel's not included. Now, I think that's interesting. They kind of omitted telling Daniel about this plot for reasons that we understand. They were jealous of Daniel and wanted to cause Daniel problems. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So, in a way, they're kind of uplifting the king. They're kind of bragging on him and saying, "Oh, King, you're great, you're wonderful. Let's tell everybody to stop their religious practices and only acknowledge you for 30 days." In other words, this is a little trial run, King. Let's see if everybody will just drop what they're doing and worship you for 30 days. They can't ask their gods for anything. They can't ask any other petition of anyone save of you, O king. And this is a way to kind of build up Darius. And I think Darius kind of falls for this plot maybe because of his own pride and his own arrogance. He's the king, he's all powerful, he's in control, and I think a lot of times power goes to our heads. And there's the saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's why we have a democracy in our country, and why I love democracy, is because there's a checks and balance system. But when people abuse that system for political or personal gain, then they can destroy that system. And I think we see the makings of that in our own country. But here, they said, "Okay, King, nobody can make a petition of anyone except through you." In verse 8, "Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not." Now, I don't know a lot about the laws of the Medes and Persians, but apparently there was a law that if a king wrote a decree, it was basically written in stone, we would say. It could not be changed. It could not be altered. It was a decree, and it had to be executed just as the king said, or it had to had to play out. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. So he, in pride or arrogance or whatever, and you would have thought that he would have said, "Hey, where's Daniel? Let me ask his opinion." But I think he got caught up in the moment. A lot of times we do. He didn't really think things through, and he made a decision that's going to come back to haunt him. He's going to be really sad that he made this decision, and he's going to regret it. I think a lot of times we make decisions a little too hasty. I've heard the saying, you need to count to 10 before you respond. Sometimes I think you need to sleep on something before you respond. If we sleep on it and think about it, give God time to speak to us, we may have a different opinion, and we may do things differently. But for whatever reason, Darius did not do that. He did not think about it. He just signed the decree, and now let's see what happens. In verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. In other words, Daniel knew that the decree was written. He knew for 30 days he was not supposed to make a petition to any god, but he knew his God was on the throne, not Darius. God was on the throne. And so ultimately his responsibility was to God, and God said pray, and Daniel said I'm going to pray. And this comes from 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 36 through 39. If you want to write that down and go back and look at it, or if you want to pause the video and turn to 2 Chronicles to read along, you can do that. But in 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 36 to 39, it says, if they sin against thee, this is Solomon speaking at the time that he's dedicating his temple to God. If they sin against thee, for there is no man which sinneth not. I think that's interesting that Solomon points that out. And thou be angry with them, and deliver them over before their enemies, and they carry them away captive into a land far off or near. Yet if they bethink themselves in the land whither they are carried captive, and turn and pray unto thee in the land of their captivity, saying, we have sinned, we have done amiss, and have dealt wickedly, if they return to thee with all their heart, with all their soul, in the land of their captivity, whether they have carried them captives, and pray toward their land which thou gavest unto their fathers, and toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive thy people which have sinned against thee. So Solomon had set up this years before Daniel come on the scene, that if the children of Israel were ever taken captive to a faraway land, that they prayed toward Jerusalem and they made their petitions to God. So Daniel is carrying through with what Solomon had established. He's a Jewish man in a foreign land. He still serves God. God is still the one taking care of him. So 3 times a day he's going to hit his knees and cry out to God, no matter what Darius says and no matter what these princes. So of course these men are watching. They know exactly what Daniel's going to do. They know he's going to make a petition to God. That's why they had the king sign the decree. So they're just waiting for the moment to actually see him do it and then run and tell Darius. In verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Now I want you to notice they didn't run in and say, hey look, this is what Daniel's doing. It's kind of like Satan in the Garden of Eden. Satan kind of says to Eve, has God said you shall not eat from this tree? Almost as if he's reassuring the king here that he has signed a decree and it can't be changed. And then they're going to tell him the answer. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? So, have you not signed a petition? The king answered and said, yes, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. So the king even says, yes, I have, and it can't be changed. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, that foreigner, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Tattletales. Look at what they've done. They have constructed a plan and caused the king to sign it. The trap has been set. Now Daniel plays into the trap. And here we are. The king has been notified. Now I want to ask you a question. As a Christian, could Daniel have just stopped praying for 30 days? I want you to think about that. Could Daniel have just stopped praying? You know, we can pray in our hearts. We can pray privately. Could Daniel have just stopped his public prayer? Although it wasn't public, but he opened his window, which is what he always did. He opened his window and prayed toward Jerusalem. So why could he have not just waited 30 days? It was just 30 days. Folks, I think as we think about that thought, we need to be what God wants us to be every single day, no matter what the world says and no matter what the world does. Here Daniel continued. Now, he didn't start something he wasn't doing before. He continued doing what he normally did every single day. He didn't start something in defiance of the law. He continued doing what was normal for him, even though it was forbidden to do so. There's wisdom in when and how to make those kinds of choices. And as Christians, we need to be closely in tune to God so that He can direct us in the right way at the appropriate time. Verse 14 says, Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. He knew he had made a mistake. He knew at that point, it dawned on him, I should have asked Daniel. I should have run this by somebody else. I have made a grave mistake. And he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So he did everything within his power to come up with a way to change the decree that he had made. But remember, the decree had been signed, and under the law of the Medes and Persians, it altered not. So he couldn't change it. He couldn't stop this process. He had already made the mistake, and it was done. A lesson to us, once a deed is done, it's done. And we need to be careful. Verse 15, Then these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. In other words, king, what's going on? Why are you delaying this process? You can't change the law. Almost as if they're now in authority over the king. All of a sudden, that phrase, O king, live forever, has been changed. Now they've got the king over a barrel, and they're taking advantage of him. And they know it, and they're full aware of their behavior. This is going to come back to haunt them because we can't plot against God and win forever. Verse 16, Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. So the king said, Go get him. It's at the end of the day. I've done all I can. Bring him up. And they cast Daniel into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. I think this is spoken out of desperation. I don't think this is spoken out of confidence on the part of Darius. I think it's spoken out of a hope that Darius had that God would save Daniel and that God would deliver Daniel. I think he recognized Daniel as a God-fearing man. I think he was very fond of Daniel. Daniel worked hard for Darius. But I think Darius here at this moment is almost, this could be a question rather than a statement. Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. This is a huge hope. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, so the hole was covered where no one could escape. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. So he sealed it with his own ring and placed Daniel in the lion's den. Religious leaders and political leaders sometimes hem themselves in. Look at Pilate. Pilate brought a pan of water out before the people and said, I wash my hands of the blood of this innocent man. Yet he did not stop the execution of Jesus. He was in a political position where he had to go through with it. Folks, it's very difficult to be in politics. It's very difficult to be in a position of authority because sometimes we make bad decisions, and then we have to carry through with those bad decisions. And it's not always a pretty sight, and it's not always the thing that a person in politics wants to do. But once a deed is done, it's done. And you have to move on. So here, the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Darius had a miserable night, and rightly so. He's placed in. He's made a huge mistake. He has been arrogant, prideful, allowed a law to be written that elevated him to a position of authority above God, and now it's cost him a dear friend, Darius. Daniel. So here he's miserable. His conscience is bothering him. He can't sleep. He doesn't want to hear any music. He doesn't want any happiness. He's distraught. He's upset. He's frustrated, and he spends the night that way. Fasting means he didn't eat. He couldn't eat. He didn't eat supper, and he had a very bad night. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? This king went running in haste. As soon as daybreak, as soon as it was appropriate for him to be out of his chamber, he went running to the lion's den. And there he cried out with a lamentable voice. I think he was distraught and heartbroken that he had made this horrible decision. And he goes running to the den of lions, and he cries out to Daniel, I think in pure agony, and his heart is just troubled to the point of beyond tears to just pure emotion. Is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee? He knew of Daniel's service to God. He knew of Daniel's loyalty to his God. He knew of Daniel's uprightness and his good intellect and his ability to give good advice. He recognized all of those things, but in his heart he asked, is your God able? Is our God able? Is our God able to deliver us? Yes. The answer to that is yes. Then Daniel said unto the king, O king, live forever. Now I want you to listen at this salutation spoken from a man of God. O king, live forever. King, I respect you. I respect your authority. I respect your position. Verse 22, my God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Daniel said, I'm here, king. My God has delivered me, because I was a servant of his, and king, because I was a servant of yours. Folks, it's commanded that we serve and honor the king. It's commanded that we honor those governments that are over us. It's commanded that we go by the laws of the land to the extent that those laws don't infringe upon our worship of God. It's important that we serve God. And Daniel said, I'm here and I have no hurt. My God has delivered me. Verse 23, then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. The king is rejoicing. He is thrilled that his president that he preferred above all the others is okay, and that he is fine. And in Darius's mind, the God of Daniel is the only God, the supreme God, the God to be feared, the God to be worshipped. And that God has demonstrated his power to this king in a real and powerful way. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. Folks, no manner of hurt, because we believe in God. We may lose our lives. We may be killed. Many have been killed for their faith. The disciples, many of them were killed for their faith in God. Throughout the ages, from the time of Christ until today, many have been killed because of their faith in God. I cannot promise you that serving God means that you will always be delivered from the lion's den. I cannot say that you will always be delivered from the fiery furnace. What I can say is God is able. God is able to deliver. And here he had a purpose for Daniel. He had a purpose for Darius. He wanted the Medes and the Persians, like the Babylonians, to understand that their authority rests in him, and that they need to trust God, because God is more powerful than any man-made decree, any man-made punishment. God is more powerful than any of those things. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. And this is a horrible sight. And the wrath of God is a horrible thing. Not only were these men destroyed, their children and their wives were also destroyed. Now I tell you, I don't think this was God's doing. I think this was man's doing. Darius was angry. He was very angry. And he ordered that these men be thrown into the den of lions. In the Old Testament, families were held accountable for the decisions of their parents. God said there's a time coming when every person as an individual will be responsible for their own actions. And that is what has occurred under Jesus Christ. We're, as individuals, responsible for our actions, not the actions of our parents or the actions of our children. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. In verse 26, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. Look at how Darius now acknowledges God. And it acknowledges the God of Daniel. I still serve that God of Daniel today. I still serve him through my relationship with Jesus Christ, having accepted Christ as my Savior, having my sins under the blood of the Lamb. By confessing them to Jesus Christ, I am a part of God's kingdom. Daniel's God is my God, and he is able to deliver if I will simply trust in him. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Verse 28, the last verse. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Cyrus would come after Darius. Possibly Cyrus was the king already. and that's where there's many different opinions of who Darius was. Darius is spoken of it by Daniel as the king, but may have actually been a governor under Cyrus, who was a Persian. Darius was a Mede. The Medo-Persian Empire kind of meshed together. So there's some uncertainty there. But I know that God was in this story, and that this is a real story, a true story, and one that can give us confidence as we face opposition in the world in which we live. Hope you have a good rest of the week. Please pray for everyone in our church, that we would all continue to be what God would have us to be. And I hope to see you on Sunday morning at 10. Have a good week.